The battle tower is the source of a lot of rumours. The internet seems completely set on the idea that the game cheats against you here. There have been accusations about enemies with more than 4 moves, enemies that are impossibly fast, the enemy AI responding to inputs the player does, and the enemy AI having the perfect counter team to the player. I'm going to investigate all of these fully. I'm also going to do it with the Tower 1 in a billion bad luck challenge. The battle tower is a simple concept. Bring 3 Pokemon and try and win as many battles in a row as possible. So what is this bad luck challenge I've come up with? Well, most guides or tutorials use difficult to make teams. You know what I'm talking about here. Single encounter per file legendaries, egg moves that require chain breeding, TM moves that you only get once per save file, and sometimes complex RNG manipulations or special event Pokemon. Not everyone has access to every game, and in the past only a tiny fraction of users knew how to properly RNG manipulate. How strong a Pokemon is depends on each of their 6 IVs. Each IV can be a value from 0 to 31, with 32 possibilities. So the chance of having a perfectly terrible Pokemon, with 0 IVs in every stat, is about 32 to the power of -6, or about 1 in a billion. This is my team, 0 IV in every stat, repeatedly available in every Generation 4 Frontier game. No single-use move tutors or TMs, no egg moves. It feels important to use a team that's accessible to everyone, including players playing back in 2008. I can guarantee you that anyone aiming to copy this team will end up with a better team than what I actually have. I have over 10,000 games in the Battle Tower, so this kind of challenge is important to keep things fresh. The first Pokemon I'm going to use is Starmie. Starmie is a very straightforward Pokemon to use as it leverages its speed to 2-shot most opponents. To that end, I'm only going to train my Starmie in Special Attack and Speed. Water is quietly one of the best types in the game for Generation 4. In the Pokédex-defined meta of the Frontier, Water also has a very big advantage. One of Starmie's most important assets is the fact that it's a Water type that beats other Water types, with access to the move Thunderbolt. This is a very famous Starmie set, often known as Spit Starmie, using the first letter of each of its moves. In the world of very optimised teams, there has been some debate about what item Starmie should run in the lead slot. But for this team, designed to be easy to make, easy to copy, and to be forgiving, I favoured a Focus Sash. This is a good safety net, and it's also important to note that this Starmie would struggle to use the increased power from an item like Expert Belt or Life Orb effectively anyway. Now, while Water is a good type, the best 2 types in the game are definitely Dragon and Steel. And in fact, Dragon and Steel have an even greater type advantage in the Pokédex-defined meta of the Frontier. My Dragon type is going to be Garchomp, and I'm going to train it in Attack and Speed EVs. Garchomp is also very simple, and it's definitely one of the most broken Pokemon you can possibly bring into the Frontier in this generation. It's fast in almost everything that matters, and if it is slower than anything, it's usually up against an electric type. After putting on Outrage and Earthquake, it doesn't actually need to run a third attack. It's important to remember that even if they're super effective, Garchomp's fire moves are weaker than Earthquake or Outrage. This gives Garchomp the room to run the extremely useful Swords Dance and Substitute, which we'll see later in the video. Garchomp doesn't actually need or use items that are effectively in Generation 4, and the item I'm going to end up running here is actually Lumberry, which helps improve Garchomp's overall consistency, but particularly helps against sleep moves like Hypnosis, and against contact abilities that can cause status, such as Static or Flame Body. The final member of the team is a Steel type. I'm going to be running Scizor here, but I'm going to mention alternatives at the end of the video. Scizor is going to provide more of an offensive support role, and because of this I'm going to be running Leftovers, although you could also run Citrus Berry. Technician Bug Bite is an incredibly strong move, and while Scizor itself is not known for being fast, the tower itself is not that fast either. The main 2 moves are actually Bullet Punch and Swords Dance. Anyone unfamiliar with how Scizor works in Generation 4 might be surprised by how effectively Scizor can sweep with only minimal setup opportunity. For the final move, I'm just going to be running Superpower to round out the coverage. Bullet Punch is a really important move in this set, and I'll explain later how in the Frontier, having a way to deal damage safely while ignoring the priority effect of other moves and other items is really important. This overall team concept of Dragon Water Steel dates back to posts from before when Diamond and Pearl came out, and it's definitely not an idea that belongs to any person. On the topic of basic team construction and function, I want to address one of the really common cheating accusations brought against the Battle Tower, which is that the tower somehow cheats to bring a team that counter-teams you, or the tower knows exactly what to bring to make you lose. The team I've outlined has more than one weakness, but the most important weakness this team has is called Role Overload. A good example of this is to talk about how the team deals with other water types. Normally we'll go through Starmie, but the problem is that Starmie isn't necessarily going to be able to knock out 3 water types in a row. So am I very unlucky if an enemy turns up with 3 strong water types? The answer is actually no. You see, the tower runs these themed trainers. Fishermen and sailors both have rosters dominated by water types, and in fact they're incredibly likely to bring 2 or 3 water types to a battle. The tower is not cheating then if I run into one of them and their water types manage to overload Starmie. I'm not sure if this is intentionally designed difficulty by the developers, but it does make the tower quite difficult. Now you might be thinking, okay, well if Fishermen can beat this team, shouldn't we be using something else? And the response to that is that there is no straightforward team of free Pokemon that has no weaknesses. Although we're slightly weak to the free water types, we're also very strong against many other trainers, and we should be generally okay in the water type matchup, because Starmie is pretty good against water types, and because Garchomp and Scizor will do okay into them. In the actual run, the first match I want to focus on is a boss battle at 21 wins. Palmer shows up here with a team of Milotic, Rhyperior and Dragonite. These Pokemon can appear in any order. Because Palmer runs perfect 31 IVs, his team has a massive stat advantage over mine. From a strategic perspective, most of this fight should be pretty straightforward. It's important to keep Starmie alive and to keep its focus stats intact so that it can beat both Rhyperior and Dragonite. Our Starmie is so weak that it will never actually OHKO Dragonite with Ice Beam. If Palmer leads with Milotic, I would have to switch out Starmie so Starmie could do its job against the others later. There are also a few important backup plans here. A big one is that Rhyperior actually holds the item Focus Band. If Focus Band does go off, I'd have to set up Swords Dance, quite likely on Garchomp, and proceed from there. This is not ideal, but it's also not as bad as some may think, as Dragonite will come in first before Milotic against Garchomp, and Dragonite is slower than Garchomp. Luckily, in my battle, Rhyperior's Focus Band does not go off, and I can continue with the primary game plan. While Palmer's Dragonite will run Blumberry, which will save it from being frozen, I should still go for the Ice Beam first, as I might be able to get it with a crit. If I don't manage to crit Dragonite, this turn marks a big strategical breakpoint in the game. If Dragonite was to use the move Thunder Wave, I would have to switch Starmie out, taking advantage of Natural Cure. If Dragon Dance was used, I would keep Starmie in as I'm still actually faster even with 0 IVs. But instead I get the move Dragon Claw. This is because my Starmie is so weak that Dragonite actually can see a potential kill with Dragon Claw. The AI does not actually understand that Starmie has a Focus Sash. If Palmer's Milotic does not lead, it's actually guaranteed to come out third, due to a quirk of how the AI works in Generation 4. Milotic is where the strategy becomes much more important. We know what Milotic set this is. Palmer only uses set 1 Pokemon, so this is Milotic 1. I've linked a spreadsheet below with all the sets in the frontier. We'll talk about that more later. For context here, Milotic is going to 1-hit kill both Starmie and Garchomp. Milotic will 2-hit kill Scizor, but as Milotic has Hypnosis and because it's faster than Scizor, Scizor may never get to use an attack if it wants to use Bug Bite. Indeed, Thunderbolt paralysing Milotic would have been a good trade-off despite the presence of Marvel Skill because of this. The combination of Thunderbolt and Outrage won't actually kill Milotic here, and that's why the situation is so terrible. You see, Milotic is due a massive heal with Shell Bell as it kills Garchomp with Ice Beam, healing enough to survive Bullet Punch from Scizor. In other words, I would lose if Hypnosis hit Scizor. But there is actually a very obscure mechanic in Generation 4 which can save me here. You see, both Life Orb Recoil and Shell Bell Healing do not activate on the Substitute. So I can simply substitute with Garchomp. This denies Milotic most of the healing it would have got from a full HP Garchomp. Instead, after using Substitute 3 times, Milotic is not going to heal anywhere near enough from my low HP Garchomp, and I'm able to use the move Outrage, leaving Milotic at such low HP that it's bound to die to the next Bullet Punch from Scizor. Now the tower can get way more complicated than this, and this kind of knowledge isn't required for every battle at all. But I want to highlight that if I didn't employ this strategy, and if I had lost to Milotic hitting Hypnosis on Scizor, I'd probably be complaining about bad luck here, or perhaps complaining that the team wasn't able to do the challenge. Still, this is unlikely to matter for most other players, as most other players will be running a much stronger team here. And I should mention that of course, an averagely strong Starmie and Garchomp would easily take out Milotic with the combination of Thunderbolt into Outrage, leaving this kind of optimization as pointless. So I'll have to wait for a future battle to run into some of this impossibly bad luck that the internet seems to like complaining about for the battle tower. As a quick side note for while the battle is ending, I should mention that if Milotic does lead this game, and I do go Garchomp first, then I can just lose to a crit. This kind of bad luck can be unavoidable in bad matchups, as I mentioned in team building. In fact, on the topic of bad luck, let's just address the elephant in the room. Most players underestimate just how much luck factors into the battle frontier, because they're used to the main games, which are easy by design. Underleveled and underfitted opponent teams with 0 IVs and 0 EVs means that most fights end before the AI even gets a chance to act. But in the frontier, all of these crutches are gone. That means no overleveling, no counter teaming, and the opponent's using strong, well optimized Pokemon. Naturally, this gives the AI far more chances to get lucky with crits or status effects. Many claims of the frontier cheating stem from this shift, but when you play dozens of battles in a row, it's statistically inevitable that at least one will be incredibly unlucky. Maybe a double crit, maybe a burn, maybe a freeze at a critical moment. That's just variance. Across many games, the worst outlier is always going to look outrageous, but without battle videos to verify them, most horror stories remain just that, stories. Battle 29 is actually a very good example of this. In Battle 29 I faced Frostlass 2. I switched to Starmie on the first Ice Punch because I know that Natural Cure will remove the freeze if it strikes then. This reduces the chance for Sizzle to be frozen by Ice Punch, as Frostlass is no longer guaranteed to use Ice Punch when Starmie is in. But Frostlass uses Ice Punch on the next turn and freezes Sizzle anyway. This stuff just happens. I managed to fall out here and go on to win, but I can't really complain if 10% freeze makes me lose. After all, I'm being hit by easily enough ice moves that I should be expected to be frozen at least once over the course of these 49 battles. We've talked a lot about the enemy cheating in the game, but what about how the player can get some revenge? Battle 35 is a good time to talk about this. My opponent here is Sailor Derian, and he sends out Hariyama. If we look this up in Mo's Battle Tower Helper, we can see that it must be Hariyama 3. His Pokemon are 18 IV, and we can see everything about this Hariyama in here. We also could have looked this up in the spreadsheet or in Bulbapedia. I'm going to link both of those below. In fact, this can go a step further. There are Battle Tower specific damage calculators, with all these enemy sets preloaded in. I can just go there and check out whatever damage ranges I want. It's no surprise that Starmie can't one-shot Hariyama with Psychic, but this Hariyama has both Ice Punch and Fire Punch, meaning there is no good alternative for a safe switch. And so Starmie will have to stay in and use up its Focus Sash to win this 1v1. The uncertainty of what move Hariyama would use means that even if Thunder Punch did paralyze me, I would not be able to switch, as it would just be way too risky to switch into the wrong move here. A game starting like this is pretty much exactly what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned how the team is slightly unreliable in terms of role overload. Miltank 3 comes out next, and this really is a true zero IV moment. Miltank can actually survive both Surf and Earthquake here, something it would never do against most Starmie and Garchomp. I could also use Outrage instead of Earthquake for the increased power, but hilariously, zero IV is so bad that Miltank can also survive Outrage. Miltank 3 runs both Fire and Ice Punch. This is a good time to mention that super effective is not always everything. A healthy 31 IV Garchomp would never faint to Ice Punch here. The thing is, my terrible 0 IV Garchomp does faint to Ice Punch sometimes. The combination of all these damage ranges not working out in my favour was bad luck, but it's also something that can just happen during the run. Scizor has to come in and finish Miltank off, and provide more bullet punch propaganda. Scizor should be completely fine in 1v1 against most opponents, but it's actually Swampert 3 that comes in. This is terrible for a few reasons. First up, my 0 IV Scizor is actually slower than the Swampert. Second, I don't 2-shot with Bug Bite. And third, Muddy Water and Earth Power both 2-shot Scizor. In fact, it's even worse. The Swampert also has Counter, and Counter will 1-shot me. That's another consequence of running a 0 IV Scizor. On paper this looks lost, but we can actually claw back some percentage to win. You see, the AI move operations have been mapped out for Gen 4. Counter specifically is an interesting one. Since the last move I used, Bullet Punch, was physical, the overall chance that Swampert uses counter here is around 80%. This provides very clear potential paths to victory. However, it's really important to state that this Swampert does have the chance to attack here, and if it does while I'm using Sword Stance, I would lose. A common Frontier cheating accusation is the idea that the AI somehow reads what the player is going to do, and then cheats to react to this move. If the AI did this, I would never be able to win a match like this. And in fact, I owe my victory here to the fact that the AI was somewhat predictable. In thousands of games, I've never seen the AI break out of the algorithms that we know are data mined from the game that determine how it will use its moves. Match 43 was a very innocent looking game which was actually very close. First up, Dugtrio rolled the ability Arena Trap, forcing Starmie to take damage at the start of breaking the sash. Mark 3 comes out next, and the match looks like an easy win. However, this is a really important case study in always setting up as much as you possibly can, and give the opponent no room to play back. You see, the final Pokemon out is Floatzel 3. This might not seem that dramatic. This Floatzel will outspeed and one-shot both Garchomp and Starmie. Scizor easily could have been at much lower health, and Scizor easily also could have been at much lower attack boosts. In some of these scenarios I would lose by the fact that I didn't take the full setup against Muck. Match 48 highlights a famous cheating allegation for the tower. This is not a close game, and I should say that despite being 0 IV, most games are not close to this too. But Rhydon 4 is a famous set in the Frontier. You see, it has the item Quick Claw. Quick Claw is a particularly unfair item. If you turn off animations, you won't even know when it's going off. and this might give the false impression that the Pokemon is impossibly fast. Quick Claw is so deadly because 20% is kind of perfect anti-luck. 20% is a ridiculously high chance to ignore the most important mechanic in the game, but 20% is also way too unreliable for the player to ever rely on. I will say that for any particularly long streak, you will inevitably have games where Quick Claw goes off multiple times in a row. If you ever catch one of my streams, you'll note that Quick Claw is easily the thing I complain about the most. I personally feel like it's bad game design to just completely ignore the way the speed mechanic works. After 48 wins, it's time to face Palmer again for the gold print. Palmer this time brings Regigigas, Heatran and Cresselia, all set 4. The order of these is random. In many ways this is a much worse team than the one he uses at Battle 21. The exception is Cresselia. You really must have something to beat this Cresselia, as Moonlight and Leftovers can be annoying. The ideal lead for my team would be Heatran, and indeed if Heatran comes out it will be almost impossible to lose. It's important to remember Palmer's items for this fight. Heatran has Focus Sash and Regigigas has Bright Powder. Neither of these should be a problem if you plan for them properly. Palmer actually leads with Regigigas. This is a perfect time to bring Scizor in. Remember, a key part of playing this team well is knowing when to bring in Scizor and go for a Swords Dance, and when to keep Starmie's Focus Sash intact. I could set up more with Scizor here and go up to +6 in attack, but I know that the next Pokemon in is going to be the Focus Sash Heatran, which outspeeds Scizor and of course survives Superpower. So setting up too much would be a mistake. I'd just be wasting Scizor's HP, and I might need Scizor at high HP for Cresselia later on in battle. It wouldn't be correct to use Superpower here though, as Superpower might not take out Regigigas due to the attack drop that I would get from the first Superpower. A stronger Scizor would be able to 2-shot with Superpower here. And yet, that would still be a mistake, as then I would have to hit 2 moves against this Regigigas with Bright Powder instead of just 1 move. Remember that Bright Powder can't make my Swords Dance miss. Superpower connects, and with Bright Powder down, I'm actually incredibly likely to win, so long as I play out the rest of the match optimally. Heatran is guaranteed to come in, as it has a super effective move it can use against Scizor in Magma Storm. A saying I repeat a lot on stream is that the obvious move is often the correct one. Against Heatran, the obvious move is clearly to switch to Starmie, and this is correct, but we want to do it for the right reasons. Remember that Cresselia has Signal Beam, and so dominates Starmie in the 1v1. This is the most use I'm going to be able to get out of Starmie in this game. I will use Starmie as a way to break Heatran's Sash before Starmie faints. The best move that Starmie can use here is not actually Surf but Thunderbolt. This is because Earthquake will always kill Heatran after the Sash is broken. Thunderbolt is therefore better than Surf because it introduces a chance for Heatran to get fully paralysed and lose to Starmie directly. Part of playing Frontier is always about playing towards the worst luck scenario anyway. Here we would be worried about Starmie being crit as it switches in, as I would faint. This is because while Starmie does survive the Magma Storm crit with its Focus Sash, the trapping damage that Magma Storm would inflict at the end of the turn would take down Starmie after it had been brought down to 1 HP in the Sash. If that happens, it's actually fine. It just means that Garchomp will be hit by Heatran after using the first Earthquake. If I get very unlucky, Heatran could also crit Garchomp, but even in that scenario, I still win by taking out Heatran with a Bullet Punch from Scizor, after dealing the Earthquake damage on the first turn. Regardless, no ultra bad luck happens, and Garchomp is able to take out the Heatran. Cresselia comes out last. Cresselia actually runs both Ice Beam and Psychic and Moonlight. Cresselia will of course be using Ice Beam against Garchomp. I mention this because there is one last really stupid way I could potentially lose the game. If I decided for some reason to switch out Garchomp and bring Scizor into the Ice Beam aimed at Garchomp, and then Ice Beam was able to free Scizor, I would lose. Part of playing well is just not doing something really stupid in a winning position. A non-zero IV Garchomp could actually survive this Ice Beam from Cresselia, since Ice Beam is non-stab and Cresselia's special attack is not very good. But this is terrible zero IV Garchomp, and so Cresselia gets to kill it with a single Ice Beam here. Palmer does still actually have a very small chance to win this match. If he was able to get a Psychic Spadef drop on Scizor into a crit Psychic against Scizor, then Scizor could faint to that, even with its leftovers. This would be a situation where Citrus Berry would actually be better than leftovers. This sounds incredibly unlikely, and it is. You might be thinking that there's no way that I could play around this, but actually I can still maximise my own odds. Using Bug Bite twice is actually much better here than using Swords Dance into Bug Bite. as using 2 Bug Bite gains some additional chance to win from the simple fact that the first Bug Bite could crit Cresselia, which would easily kill it. Moonlight is not actually a concern at all in this situation for 2 reasons. First up, the AI will never actually use Moonlight when it's faster than the player. And second, Moonlight only has 5 PP. The AI does not maximise the PP on its sets, and so Bug Bite twice is just strictly better than Swords Dance into Bug Bite. I was actually surprised that this team managed to do Gold Print on its first attempt. So surprised in fact that I ended up playing back to 49 again with the same team to prove that it wasn't a fluke. Still, anyone watching along might have some complaints about the team being too hard to get, and so we'll talk about substitutions now. First up, I recommend against substituting out Starmie. Every game has easy and repeatable access to Starmie. Starmie is not as good as many people think it is, but if you are new to the Frontier, then it's a great safety net. Ideally your own Starmie has much better stats than the one I just used here. The one thing I would mention is to make sure you avoid having a minus speed nature. Next up, let's talk about the guard jump substitutes. There are a few really obvious candidates here, and they all work in my opinion. Highest on the list would be either Latios or Latias, depending on your version of Heart Gold or Soul Silver, but Celements and Dragonite can also work. The one thing I would caution on is the fact that Dragonite is a lot slower than the rest of them. Depending on your game, you are guaranteed to have access to at least one of these dragons, and I recommend bringing at least one of them. Scizor being a trade evolution is the one I see most people struggling with. The best alternative is probably Metagross, which can easily be obtained in Heart Gold Soul Silver and be bred with Ditto. Metagross would run a very similar set but run Explosion over Swords Dance. And Metagross would of course also be best off running some kind of defensive item like either Leftovers or Citrus. After that, the steel options actually get much worse. Lucario is okay, but if you do decide to use Lucario, make sure you bring something that can beat Palmer too, as Lucario is much weaker to Cresselia than both Scizor and Metagross. Registeel is quite good, but Registeel is also you really need to know what you're doing kind of Pokemon. It's hard to emphasise just how much the move Bullet Punch saves this team from awkward situations and potential disasters. Registeel does not get Bullet Punch. What Registeel can do is offer very safe setup into a lot of opponents, but newer players might struggle to understand what a true safe setup looks like. In the future, I want to revisit this team under the new view of teaching people how to team build in the Frontier and seeing just how far a team like this can get in the Battle Tower. But I also want to do 0 IV challenges in the other facilities. If you're interested in watching any of these challenges, you can feel free to follow me on Twitch, or check out my VOD YouTube channel, or feel free to join my Discord. I'll leave details for all of that in the description below. Until next time.